Hey everybody, Nate Brown here, and welcome to section 3 of my tutorial on how to make a basic animation rig in Blender. In this video, we're going to be building the basic structure of the skeleton for our rig that we will then be skinning the model to in later videos. Now you'll notice that I've made a few changes to our model here. I've just adjusted his proportions a little bit here and there to make him look a little more human looking. But no matter what model you have, or even if your model is this Blockman but just looks a little different, as long as it's got a head, 2 arms, a body, and 2 legs, the skeleton that we're going to be creating throughout these videos will work just perfectly. The first thing I'd like to do in this video is to clean up our hierarchy a little bit. Now the hierarchy is this window right over here on the right, and you're going to see a ton of cubes in here right now, if you made this character, that is. All of these cubes are the different cubes that we created to make up this guy's body. So let's get these put away in their own little box, because when we're making the skeleton, we're going to be using the hierarchy quite a bit throughout the future videos, and we'll need this to be a little cleaned up so we can see things better in here. So all you got to do is select your top cube here, scroll on down to the bottom, and shift select the bottom one. Should select everything there, and then up at the top right we can hit this little button that looks like a file box with a plus sign on it. Hit that and it should create a new collection for us at the bottom. Go ahead and just drag all of your cubes into there. Then we can collapse that new collection, and then we can rename that by double clicking on it. I would call it just model, something along those lines. And then let's drag it into this top collection that we have here. This will be our, our overall box here. Excellent. Now for the skeleton, the first thing we have to do is in object mode, we have to go to add, and we're going to add an armature. An armature is going to be the overall container for all of the bones that we're going to add to our character. When you add it, it's also going to add a bone to start with that you'll see down at the bottom there. Let's zoom in a little bit and take a look at this. Now you'll see over in your hierarchy we've got your armature that you just added, and then within this armature, which is kind of like the bucket for everything that we're working with here, we've got another thing that says armature. This armature is going to be, this is our actual armature here, where this is more of just a container, much like these collections that we've got up here. The armature here is going to contain all of our bones. So if we click this, you'll see that we have our bone here as well. It's not going to select right now because right now we're in object mode, so we can only select whole objects, which in this case is the armature. So this is kind of like our object armature. If we were to go into edit mode while we have the armature selected, now we can select individual bones, which in this case we only have the one bone selected, or that we only have the one bone to select. Now you're going to want to do all of your creating and editing of your skeleton in edit mode, so make sure that is the mode that you're in right now. And then to start with, put yourself into a front view either by hitting the number 1 on your numpad or by selecting the front Y node in your view rotator up here at the top right. Now let's grab our bone that we have here by clicking the middle section of it. And let's move this up so that it is sitting right at his pelvis level. So go ahead and just move it just on the Z-axis, because we don't want to change its position left and right. We just want it to go straight up from where it started. And a quick point here, if for whatever reason your armature did not start at the origin point down here, it's probably because your 3D cursor wasn't there. If that is the case, go ahead and just delete your armature that you just created, do Shift S and 3D cursor to world origin, and then create your armature again. That should put it right at the center point, and then you can move it up from there. Now you'll notice when we move it up, it's right inside of our character, and we can't really see that too well. We can fix that though. Over on the right, we're going to go to the armature tab, which is the one that looks like a running stick man here. We can go into the viewport display options and then check off in front, and that's going to make it so that this bone is always going to be visible in front of your character, which is great for when we're putting together our skeleton here. Now a quick point about orientations with our bones. When we look at this bone here, it's straight up and down, and its orientation is it's kind of the difference between where this top nub is and where the bottom nub is. The bottom nub is always going to be where it rotates from, whereas the top nub is more of a pointer to show you which direction it's oriented in. With many bones, we're just going to build them as if they are a normal skeleton. We're not going to worry about the orientation too much, but with some bones, especially the root bone here, we want to make sure that they're at a perfect up and down or perfect flat orientation, that is, in some way, because when you're animating with this, it makes it a bit harder if you're having to have your 0 point for it be skewed in some way. So you kind of have to think to yourself when you're building your skeleton out, will it be really annoying if this bone that I'm working with here is, or will it make it hard to animate with it if the default local rotation for this is skewed? Because you're not always going to be able to use global rotation on something when you're animating. You might have to use local rotation here and there, and it can cause problems if it's not perfectly straight on in some cases, whereas in other cases it might be totally fine that it's rotated, or it might even be necessary. The root is one of these bones that we're going to want to preserve the rotation of. So with this bone, I want to keep this perfectly straight up and down like this. And as far as positioning it, we want to position it so that this bottom nub is right in the middle of his pelvis, because the bottom nub is going to be kind of the rotation point for this bone. That's where we're going to, when we're affecting this in pose mode and when we're animating with it, that's where it's going to rotate from. So that's the most important part for thinking about the functionality of these bones. Now, a quick overview of the anatomy of the bone. We've got our bottom nub here, like I've been saying, which you can select specifically. You can move that around. Same thing with the top nub. You can move that around however you'd like. And then to select the entire bone, to move it around as a whole, you can select this center part and you can move that around just like this. Let's grab our top nub and let's just move that down a little bit. What we're going to do with this bone in the end is we're going to have this bone floating on its own, and we're going to have the spine and then the legs parented to it, but we're going to parent them to it in a way that they are not physically connected. They're just going to be parented with offset is what it's called. So it's going to move as if they're connected, but they won't be physically connected, which will help us to preserve the orientation of this root bone here. Next, we can start building up the spine. So why don't we grab this whole bone here by selecting the middle piece, do Shift D to duplicate it, and then let's hit Z to snap it to our Z axis, and we can move that up until the bottom nub is positioned right between the pelvis and the first spine section there. And then you can just left click to place that there. The top nub is also going to be, when we have connected bones, that is, the top nub will also be the position of the bottom nub for the next bone in the chain. So what we can do here is we can just move this top nub up to the next section that we want a rotation point at. We can move that right up to there. And then we can just extrude out from there. So you can hit E to extrude. That's going to create another bone, and you're just going to be able to move it around with your mouse like most things in Blender here. Hit Z to snap it to the Z axis and move it up to the next point here. Do that again, hit E to extrude, Z to snap it to the Z axis, and then place it with the left click right where you want it, where it's just right between the chest and the top spine piece. Let's continue on up to the neck, hit E and then Z. Place it right there. Now remember that the bottom nub is the rotation point, so this bone here is for the chest. So we need to build another neck piece, and then we need to continue on up to the top of the head to make the head piece here. So select this piece, extrude again, Z to snap it to the Z axis, place it right between the head and the neck, and then again E to extrude and Z to snap it to the Z axis. Just bring that right up to the top of the head. Let's head down to the pelvis again, and we can build out the legs. I'm just going to, we could duplicate this pelvis piece here to start with the legs, or just as easily we can take our 3D cursor and we can place that somewhere where we want our new bone to be, and then we can go into the Add menu, and you'll notice the Add menu is much smaller when you're in edit mode for your armature, because all we can really add here to an armature is a single bone. So we're going to add a single bone there. It's just going to add it right on that 3D cursor. Grab our top nub, and since this is the leg, we actually want this facing down the opposite direction. So I'm going to move this down and through the bottom and just flip that the other direction. Move this all the way down to the knee point there. Press E and Z to snap that to the Z axis, and we'll extrude that down to the ankle. And then again E and Z, and extrude that down until the nub is right at kind of in the center of the toe piece there. That'll be perfect right there. And we'll build one more piece for the foot, but we'll do that when we change our view. When building the skeleton, we're going to do it very similarly to the way that we built our model, where we're just going to build the left side, his left side first, and then once we're completed with our skeleton, we will copy everything over to the right side. Next, we can go over to the arm and we'll start working on that. Let's grab our 3D cursor again and let's place that somewhere right about here. Our first bone that we're going to add for the arm, and by the way, you can just go to the add menu and add a single bone there. Our first bone that we're going to add is going to be the clavicle bone. Now I know that you don't actually have a joint at your clavicle on your body, but this is important for movement because on using muscles and things, you can bend your bones to shrug and things like that. Your clavicle bones are very very flexible, and you can do a lot of things even though you don't have a joint there. So in order to get that functionality for our character, we want to have a clavicle bone here that we can shrug his shoulders with. We can bend his shoulders inwards, backwards, stuff like that that you could probably achieve just with the shoulder pieces, but it's going to be a lot easier with the clavicle piece. And when you start making rigs for more complex characters, that aren't just these box pieces like this, it's very important to have this here to control some of your vertices more precisely than just with the shoulder. Now I've taken the top nub and I've moved it over to this point on the arm. In the last video we did test our rotation point slightly, and it was about here, I believe. I'd call it about a third or a quarter of the way in on both the top and side pieces of the shoulder there. Somewhere around there is probably good. We'll check on that in just a moment to make sure that that's the right position for that though, so we can move on to the next piece. Let's extrude this out. And I'm not actually going to move this on the x-axis for this one. This one I'm just going to freehand it because I want to put it, if we moved it on the x-axis, it's going to come out somewhere around here, but I want to put it right at the middle of his elbow. So I'm going to place that right there. And when we extrude this out to the wrist, you're going to notice that we're going to have a little bit of weird rotations here. The from where the shoulder is up to the elbow and then out to the wrist is going to have a angle like this, so it's going to have kind of a bent angle up and down, which is not the right angle for his elbow to bend in, and that is just something unfortunately we're going to have to deal with here because of the way that we want the shoulder to be able to rotate here. It may not seem like a huge problem when you're just bending things on your own in pose mode, but later on when we get to the point where we're building the IK-FK switch for the arm, the rotations become much more important. All you really have to remember here is that we only want to have one angle of bend in our elbow here, and that goes for any bone that you are eventually going to be putting inverse kinematics on. And we'll talk a lot more about inverse kinematics in later videos, so it's nothing you have to worry about too much here. Don't worry about this kind of stuff on all of your other bones here. It's really, in this case, it's really only going to apply to our elbow bone. That being said, if the model you're using is different from the one we have here, and for whatever reason it requires you to have multiple bends in your elbow, it's not a deal breaker. We can adjust for that later on. It just makes things a little more complicated later on, but it doesn't make anything impossible. So now with this snub selected, let's hit E, and then we'll hit X to extrude that out straight to this direction. It looks like this bone is a little high, so I'm just going to grab the whole thing and scooch that down a little bit. That's perfect. And then on the hand, I'm going to extrude that twice more, actually. We're going to hit E and then X to extrude that straight out, and then one more time, E and X. And we'll talk about that more in just a second when we work on the hand bones. Next, let's finish out the foot. We can rotate ourselves to a side view here. Bring ourselves right down here. We can grab this bottom nub here and just move that straight forward to right between the toe and the foot, and then we can extrude that and hit Y to snap it to the Y axis, and we can put that right out to the end of the toe. And that'll do it for the foot for now. We'll get that a lot more complicated in later videos. Next we can go from a top view, and let's just move the arm into place here. Starting with the clavicle, I'm just going to select the back nub of the clavicle here. It's right on the edge of his chest. I want to move that in a little bit, probably just to there is probably good. And then grabbing the rest of the arm, I want to grab the entire bones of the arm so that we can move this all as one piece and not mess up any of our rotations. I'm just going to move that back until it's about centered in the arm. Let's go ahead and build out the hand while we're here. So what we did with the two bones here is we've got this bone is going to be our wrist bone that will help rotate our hand. The entire hand will move around with that. I also built this bone here because we want to have some extra functionality here where we want to be able to bend the side of the hand down. This will allow us to form the hand around objects a little bit better if it's holding them, and things like that. With this character, he's so simple that it's not really going to matter so much. But when you get into modeling or rigging for or better models, more complex models, it's very important to have that functionality in the hand and get that realistic movement and that form-fitting, that cupping ability with the hand. Because if you ever have the camera close in on the hand grabbing something, anything like that, you're going to want some extra movement and the ability to really wrap that around whatever it's holding. Now let's just grab our rotator here actually, and let's duplicate that. That's Shift D, and we can just move that over to here where it's going to be, the back nub is going to be placed between the hand and the first pinky segment. Then we can grab this this end piece here and just extrude, or just move that out to the next joint there, and then we can extrude that on the X-axis, so E and then X, place that right there. Again, E and X, and bring that out to the tip of the finger. Let's grab all of these bones and we can duplicate that, and we can hit Y to duplicate that, and then Shift D to duplicate it, and then Y to just drag it straight down to the next finger. Again, Shift D and then Y, and Shift D and Y. Excellent. Now let's just rearrange the joints on this so that they fit things correctly. Excellent. Now we have all of these fingers parented to this bone right here. And that's because we duplicated it from the hand rotator bone. But we actually want to change that up slightly. So these two fingers, the index and the middle finger, we do want parented to the hand piece here. But then the pinky and the ring finger I want to be parented to the hand rotator because I want those to rotate with that when we're bending the hand inwards. So grab this backbone here for the pinky, and then shift select the hand rotator and do Control P, and we're going to keep offset, and you'll see the little dotted line changes to the hand rotator. That means that this is parented to this, so it's going to move as if it's connected to this piece here, which is what we want, but it's not going to actually physically connect, so we're preserving the rotation of this piece here, which is important for this rotator, because we need this to rotate in a perfectly straight manner like that. Again, with the ring finger, let's grab the back piece and then shift select the rotator, Control P to parent, and then keep offset. Excellent. So now you can see these two are parented to the hand rotator. Meanwhile, these two are parented to the wrist bone, which is exactly what we want. We're going to build out the thumb next, and to do that we can actually just duplicate this hand rotator again. So with that selected, Shift D, and I'm going to bring that down. Now normally you'd think we would start with right here and then go out through the thumb like normal. I'm going to build one extra bone to the thumb though, which is going to be a thumb rotator bone. This bone is going to allow us to have a little bit more specific movement for our thumb. Now I'm just going to place the bone here, and then I'm going to rotate. I just want to show you what I mean by that. If we look at, you don't have to follow along here, I'm just showing you what I'm thinking for the thumb. I want the thumb to be able to rotate in this way like this, as far as the this green circle here, kind of ignoring the bone. I want to be able to rotate like this, and then like this as well. Right, and you could achieve that if we didn't use this bone, if we just had the regular thumb bones here. You could achieve that by doing the global rotation on the bone, even though it's angled slightly differently. But I want to build all the functionality of this hand, all the finger bends, everything like that, into a hand controller where we'll have custom properties that are linked to all of those things, and we'll be able to just control everything from that one spot. And when you're using a custom property to drive a rotation of a bone like that, you actually can't rotate it on the global scale. You can really only rotate it on the local scale. So in order to get what we want and rotate it on this orientation, we have to have something that's oriented kind of like the same as the global rotation, I guess. We'd have to have this oriented either straight like this or straight like how it is right now. So what I'm going to do is back to our top view, and I just have to go back into edit mode. We're going to grab this bottom knob here, or the top knob I guess it is, and we want to make this straight up and down like this. So what I'm going to do is, let's grab our back knob actually. We're going to do Shift S, and we're going to do cursor to selected. That's going to snap our 3D cursor to that position there. Then we can grab the end piece here, Shift S, and we can do selection to cursor. That's going to make it disappear, but really it's just that the two nubs are on top of each other. And then with move selected, we can just move that, we can just drag that down like this. So now we have a perfectly straight bone facing this direction, which is what we want for this rotator. Next we can extrude that out. And we can't really extrude this along a specific axis, but that's okay. We can just freehand the thumb. It doesn't have to be super exact for the rest of these pieces. I'm just going to place it right there. Extrude again by pressing E. Place that right about there and extrude one last time. Bring that out to the tip of the thumb. Perfect. Now let's get ourselves a side view. And we can see that the thumb rotator is actually already parented to this piece here, which is exactly what we want. We want that to move with the wrist when the wrist rotates around. Now if we go to a side view, let's just let's get our bones positioned out correctly, which they actually look like they already are. I did change the positioning of the fingers and the thumb slightly, so if your fingers are closer to the top and your thumb closer to the bottom like we had originally done, you can just select all of your pieces of your fingers here, shift select all of those, and you can move those up a little bit, and same thing with the thumb, shift select all of its pieces and move that down a little bit. Mine actually happen to be right in the center where the model already has his fingers right now, so that is good to go. Next, let's go to a side view, and let's get his spine set up correctly. So his spine is straight through the middle of his body right now, but I would prefer to move that to the back and have it be a little more natural looking with kind of a bend in it and things like that. So I'm just going to grab this piece by piece and move this a little bit farther back. And while I'm doing this, I'm just going to build a bit of a curve into his back, because I think that'll give him nice natural movement. But when you're positioning stuff like this, you're just thinking to yourself, what kind of movement do I want my character to have? You know, if you want his abdomen to have more of a snake-like, super uniform movement to it, have them straight through the middle. That's totally fine. Or if you wanted it at the front, that's fine too. You're just trying to think about what kind of movement you want when you're building these things. The neck is right here. Let's move the neck back a little bit as well, and the head as well. I'd like that to be kind of straight up and down with the neck actually. So why don't we just grab the whole neck bone and we'll move that back like this. Actually, let's grab the head as well. Move that right back like this, because I wouldn't mind having the head be a straight up and down orientation like that. Okay. And the last thing we need to do is finish parenting everything to each other. So right now we've got our root is by itself, our spine is by itself, our arm and our leg are all by themselves, but we need to have them all parented together so that when you move this root around, everything moves along with it. So I'm just going to grab my leg piece here, which is not parented to anything, and then I'm going to shift select the root, and then I'm going to do Control P, keep offset. We're going to parent the spine to the root as well, so what we can do is select the spine here, and another way to parent is you can select both, and then you can right click and you'll be able to get the parent list right here as well. We can do make and keep offset. And yet another way to parent would be to select the bone right here, and then in your bone properties on the right, under relations, you can choose a parent right here. That one's going to be a little harder right now because we haven't named everything yet, so it will be hard to figure out which bone that is. So for now I'm just going to select both, and then I'm going to do Control P and keep offset. You'll notice that the first bone you select is always the one that will be parented to the second bone you select, so just keep that in mind when you're parenting your bones. Okay, and just before we finish up here, one more thing we want to do, I said we'd do earlier, is just to make sure that our shoulder is in the right place for the rotation of the arm, and make sure that that looks good. So the way we can do that is if we select this nub right here at the shoulder, we can do Shift S and do cursor to selected, and that'll snap our 3D cursor right to there. And now if we go back into object mode, we can grab the arm pieces and we can rotate them on the 3D cursor and see if that's going to be a good rotation point for them. And we're just rotating down to the side. We don't need to rotate back and forth or anything. That's going to be perfect right there, regardless of where it is on the y-axis. So you can stay in a front view, go to object mode, and just select your arm pieces. We don't have to worry about selecting the hand pieces at all, just the arm pieces are fine. We're just looking to see how the shoulder rests when it rotates all the way down. Now change your transform pivot point up here to 3D cursor, and then pick up your rotate tool, and then we can just rotate that straight down. You can hold down control if you want to see it exactly straight up and down like that. And we're just kind of looking for how the shoulder sits when we rotate it down. Now I would say that mine is sitting a little too close to the body here, and it's a little too high up for my taste too. I'd like it to be a little more flush with the top of his chest, and then I'd like this gap to be a little bit bigger, right? So if we rotate this back up, we can move our 3D cursor around, and if we move it closer to this edge up here, it's going to make the shoulder sit lower when it rotates down. Farther away from this edge will make it sit higher, and then similarly on this edge, if we go closer to this edge, it's going to make the gap between the chest and the shoulder larger, and if we go farther from that edge, it'll make it smaller. So I'd like to make that gap a little bit larger, and I'd also like his shoulder to sit a little lower, so I think I'm going to put it somewhere about there. And then we can test that out again. That gap is looking a little too small still, and it's actually a little bit too low on the shoulder now, so let me just go back in here and adjust that one more time. I'd like the gap to be a little smaller, and I'm going to go a little farther away from that so it's a little higher. Let's try that again. It's looking better. It's looking good in the gap area. His shoulder's still sitting a little low, so real quick, one more change. Let's make that a little bit farther away. And that's looking pretty good there, actually. Yeah, I like how that's looking. So now what we can do is once we find the point that we want our rotation to happen at, we can go click on your armature, which you can do by just clicking on any of the bones. That'll select your armature when you're in object mode. Go back into edit mode. We can change our transform pivot point back to median point or bounding box center. We'll do that as well. And then I'm going to move this point onto the 3D cursor. Now there is a way to do that through the Shift S menu. You can do selection to cursor, but in this case I actually don't want to do that because I don't want to, just in case the 3D cursor, which it is on a different y-axis point, I don't want to change that and put another bend into the elbow. So I'm just on the front view, I'm just going to move this on the same plane, and I'm just going to manually put it on top of the 3D cursor, and that should work just perfectly for us. And lastly, probably the most boring part of all, but the most important as well, we need to name all of these bones in a way that we can find them in the hierarchy whenever we want, and we can reference things to them and different things like that. So obviously right now, it's a little confusing when we look in here. We just have bones 1 through 15, I believe. Oh, even more than that, 1 through maybe even 30 or more. So it's a little confusing when you look at that. We need to rename all of these to be names that we could go back and find if we needed to find specific bones in here, which we will on many occasions throughout the rest of these videos. So I have a visual aid here that will list out all of the names that I've given all these bones. You'll notice that I have not chosen to put a like a left or anything like that on the arms and legs. I'm just calling them leg thigh, and that is because later on we will use a function in Blender to actually automatically add that .l to the end of that. So now all we have to do is go through for each of our bones, and we can change the name in a few different ways actually. We can either in the hierarchy, we can double click on the bone's name here and change that to whatever we want. Or if you wanted to instead, you could click on the bone and then in the bone options down here, bone properties that is, and make sure you're in the bone properties rather than the armature tab, because it's possible to rename your armature as well. I do that all the time to myself. But if we go into the bone properties, you can change the name just by clicking right up here and changing that. So just pause the video and go through and rename all of your bones like I am right now. Alright, and there we are. So everything's named, everything's looking good. We've got a great start to our skeleton. In the next few videos, we're going to be adding some complexities and functionality to the arm, hand, leg, foot, all that kind of stuff. So thank you for watching, everyone. Go ahead and save your project if you haven't already. In the next video, we're going to be adding inverse kinematics to the leg. And I will see you then. Thanks for watching, everyone.